And we are here tonight with Turbo Yoda talking about digital extortion, navigating the ransomware epidemic. Over to you, Turbo Yoda.
Hey, afternoon, evening, everyone. I'll just get started off here real fast, assuming I can switch slides because apparently I can't. There we go. Just a real quick background about me. I've been doing digital forensics incident response for like almost 5 years now. Started out in healthcare doing dead disk forensics, e-discovery. At some point, I shifted my way over to Silence, which is now defunct, but I did incident response there, and I also managed their digital forensics lab, which came with the lovely idea of being CJIS accredited. And for those of you who don't know, that's criminal justice information systems and security. And the best part about that is if you get caught messing with evidence, you go to jail right away. So fun times. I did a lot of infrastructure stuff there, and I essentially stood up a couple of the labs that they used. And eventually, I made my way over to CrowdStrike, which is where I'm currently am. Um, Outside of doing IR and stuff, I like my cars. I like my high-end audio. I'm also on the advisory board for a couple of universities in Southern California, and I also help out with CCDC, specifically the Western Region CCDC, Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition. I'm sure some of you have maybe heard from Jesse or someone else talking about some of the CCDC regions, but um, I'm also involved in that. So, without further ado, cool. Straight into it. I feel like I'm missing a slide here, but that's fine. We a lot of time on the news, you'll see a lot of different organizations under attack. I think the current one on the news right now is Halliburton. They just got hit with ransomware. And there's sort of three key reasons why threat actors want that information. Or not necessarily information, but access to your network. The first is pretty obvious. They want money. Typically, and we'll talk about this later. They want 20. I don't know what the street value of Bitcoin is right now. But they want anywhere from a couple thousand all the way up to multi-millions in money that's quote unquote untraceable. You can trace some of the Bitcoin stuff. Um, that's the primary reason. The second reason is defamation. Uh, some threat actors, very few, I think, these days are interested in sort of publicly defiling companies. Defamation is actually will key back into monetary gain. We'll talk a little bit about some of the negotiation tactics, but defamation is one of them. And the third one, which is the fun one, is destabilization. Typically, this is reserved for nation state groups. We've got nation state groups like Fancy Bear and Silent Chalima, which is Russia and North Korea, respectively. They don't necessarily directly use ransomware. However, some groups like Conti, when they were around, were affiliated with the Russian state. I don't think I specifically will talk about the Conti leaks unless anyone has any questions. But via Conti, they were able to, for some victims, play a quote unquote destabilization role. So most of the news we'll see, pertains to companies in either the EU or the US. However, plenty of this happens outside of that. South America will get quite a few hits. The UAE not as much, I think, at least in my experience. But being based in North America, I think I'd say about 80% of the engagements I've worked with ransomware are North American, and the 20% are APJ, APAC. So that's Asia Pacific, Japan, Australia, India, and then EMEA, which is Europe and so on. So when a threat actor goes into an environment, they specifically are looking for things that they can use to um, sorry, I just open up Discord, I'll see some messages. There's sort of six things that they really like that let them get a lot of leverage. The first two are pretty obvious: PII and PHI, so personally identifiable information, protected health information. So this is anything for PII like your social security number, name, address, so on and so forth. Um, PHI would be anything related to your health records. Those two tend to be the most damaging. The reason being is especially as new laws like GDPR has been passed and now it's getting updated. You have to identify the regulators and data controllers for every country in which you have jurisdiction or data in. So it becomes really convoluted when one company gets breached and they actually have to report to like 20 or 30 different regulators or um, data controllers. So those two are kind of the most damaging ones. IP, which I apparently have backwards as PI, intellectual property. It's not necessarily a strict target, but it definitely helps if they're targeting, say, an aerospace or defense company. For obvious reasons, most defense companies don't want the plans for their latest design out on the dark web. Um, so those sort of top three are the primary ones that we'll see. Financial information and strategic information are more limited to the APT groups. So um, most of the time, most of these companies are public. They don't really care about their financial information. But if they're going after a key player, again, I'll go back to defense and aerospace. That sort of stuff can be damaging in the strategic information if they're specifically going after government agencies. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, federal level. It can also be state or even local level or down to sub offices, um, where they're specifically looking for data related to something that's going on. I'm trying to think of an example that I can give without violating any NDAs, but I don't think I can. So I'll just say use your imagination for that one. And then last but not least, the memes. There are some groups who, and I put this jokingly at when I made this, but with the rise of some groups, they truly don't really care about what they're doing. Specifically, some groups like Scattered Spider, they are a little out there, a little younger group who's a little more reckless. So some of those groups don't necessarily care about any of this. It's a target, but it's not their primary goal. Wow, the keyboard really doesn't want to work. There we go. Cool. So I've been talking about e-crime. Typically at CrowdStrike, we categorize all these e-crime actors into the Spider moniker. So we'll talk about a couple at the very end, like Indrix Spider and Bitwise Spider. And I just mentioned Scatter Spider, but these are typically our e-crime actors. Um, a lot of these groups operate separately. However, there are some connections with some of these that I'll talk about. They're primarily financially motivated. One thing that I'll note that I don't think we necessarily note it publicly, but when a lot of people talk about APTs or advanced persistent threats, 95% of the time they're referring to, Russia, North Korea, China, Iran, whatever, right? I'd say what percentage did I just use? 95%? 5% um, of those groups can also be categorized as spider groups, I think. We'll talk about, I think, Indrix Spider, if I'm not mixing them up at the very end, aka Lockbit. I definitely would call them an APT, not because they're advanced, because they're very persistent. And up until recently, they've kind of been elusive up until I think SleuthCon happened a couple months ago, and that was about when the NCA got interlocked with infrastructure. So yeah, I've got the scattered figurine back here too. But some of these groups like scattered can really be classified as APT. Not necessarily because they're advanced, but because they're persistent. There is some advanced stuff with scattered, but um, I can't even talk about that stuff right now. So I'll go into the next slide. So, when a threat actor gets in, and I'll talk a little bit more about their sort of life cycle in a second, but a lot of the e-crime actors use very basic tooling. It's easy to learn, it's easy to download, it's easy to pick up. Free RMMs like Fleet Desk, AnyDesk, TeamViewer, a lot of companies use these and they don't even know that they use them sometimes with shadow IT. So e-crime actors are very easily able to leverage these tools and they're able to get around without, setting off any alarms. Typically, right, if your company standardized on, say, BombGuard, or AnyDesk within the environment, and then you see a third or second or third RMM tool come into play, it's either a threat actor or it's shadow IT. So a lot of those RMM or remote administration tools come into play quite a lot. For eCrime specifically, we'll see a lot of Cobalt Strike, the cracked version or a cracked variant. They'll actually download the cracked variant onto disk with the crack. Sometimes we'll see brute retel, not as common. Interpreter is a lot rarer now. What we'll actually see is you'll see the host name Kali pop up in system locks. They're just using a really base Kali image and what all the tools that come into it, because I'd say like 7 times out of 10, their victim is not as technically competent. So a lot of really basic stuff. We don't really see them navigate too much to anything outside of Windows. As far as Windows goes, and I'll talk about this in the next slide, right? They'll stick mainly to Windows and Active Directory. If you got Linux systems, they'll only target them really if there's an SMB share, or I'll talk about this in the next bullet point, ESXi. So mainly Windows. You'll see them, like I said, really common and easy to use tools such as Angry IP Scanner, Interpreter, so on and so forth. Um, a lot of their initial access tends to come either from unpatched edge appliances. So FortiGate and Fortinet is listed there. More often than not, if a client tells us we have a Fortinet or FortiGate appliance, we'll say that's how they got in, because they seem to have a CVE every week, like a severe CVE or RCE type deal every week. So um, yeah, there's a lot of like trauma behind hearing that name. But we'll also see some of the bigger exploits like Move It and Log4j. They'll get access when Move It was happening. That's very easy for an eCrime actor to abuse, because most of the time when they were abused, it was publicly open. So that's super easy. I mean, within I think 20, not even 24 hours of like the POC being published, we were already seeing like automated scans of public movement infrastructure and automatically just scripts running through the exfil. And we saw that activity for a couple months after. I think we took a move it case about 3 months. When I say we, like I worked on a move it case I think about 3 months after the initial thing dropped, because that organization hadn't been able to move off and move it, and they didn't bother to patch. Um, Log4j is a little less relevant now, but when that was happening, same deal, right? It's very low effort. The proof of concepts are out there, so threat actors are very easily able to script this activity and able to gain access very easily. One thing we're seeing a lot, especially with groups like Akira or Alfie and a couple others, is that they're utilizing ESXi and vSphere. So um, ESXi, for those who don't know, is a tier 1 hypervisor. It's amazing in that it doesn't allow any antivirus or EDR to run, which means you're blind. You can do syslog forwarding to a degree, but it's not complete, and a lot of shops don't truly harden vSphere. So most of the time, threat actors will leverage ESX either on ESX, at the host level, or they'll spin up a VM. It just went black. That's great. Okay. Thanks, Google. They'll leverage, like a rootkit on ESX or a bootkit on ESX, so they have persistence, or they'll spin up an unmanaged VM. We've seen it plenty of times where there's an unmanaged VM that is ran, and the client doesn't have any, or sorry, the victim doesn't have any insight because there's no telemetry on it. I think about a month and a half or 2 months ago, we published a paper with MITRE when MITRE got breached, and we found out that there's a way to actually spin up ESXi VMs, and they won't show up in the vSphere GUI or the ESXi GUI. They'll be hidden because a threat actor will gain access to ESX, and they'll be able to spin up a VM without it tying back to the GUI. I don't have that link offhand. I'll see if I can find it and post it after this in Discord, but that one was public. I don't remember what we call that exploit offhand, but that was something we published in joint with MITRE after working with them out on that. So yeah, great times. I love ESXi. Great, but it also sucks. A lot nowadays we're seeing a lot of transition into the cloud. So if you're running an email server at work that's Outlook, there's a good chance it's at the very least hybrid. So you might have Exchange on-prem, but you're also going to have something in the cloud. So coupled with that, you also might have hybrid Active Directory. So you've got, now it's called Entra ID, used to be called Azure AD. You'd have your identities both up in the cloud and in there. So that's a really big leverage point, or sorry, a really big pivot point for threat actors to get into. You can do a lot of malarkey in Entra ID. But typically, before I get into that, I'll take a step back and we'll talk about business email compromises. Believe it or not, I think it's probably more believable. There's a lot of phishing spam that gets sent out. I think actually just this morning, I received a phishing email with my address and a street view of not my house but the street, saying, "Hey, pay me 2 grand in Bitcoin." And apparently that's a thing. I think Krebs or someone put an article out this morning, detailing the same scam. I had a couple other friends in the industry get the exact same email, just down to that, right? And for a lot of people, it would freak them out. So business email compromise are still very legitimate in the environment or at work. We'll typically see victims who will get we've seen legitimate DocuSign, but even like a fake DocuSign or a fake Outlook link or a legitimate Outlook link, they'll do something like a phishing kit to steal a session token to get access to that account. It might be a man in the middle. So as they're logging into a legitimate page, that proxy is sitting there grabbing their session token. Sometimes it's a malicious link within that document. So they'll have a link. It's someone else's compromised OneDrive, right? So it's a victim of a victim, and they're just moving throughout as many companies as they can to gain access. So different ways for them to get into email, but it's always a phishing email. They rely on a lack of policies, conditional access policies with the tenant, which we shortcut as CAP. So that'll be like geo blocking. It'll be limiting the use of session IDs. It'll be enabling MFA specifically if you're not using a YubiKey, Microsoft Authenticator with number matching. That's like the number one thing to do. We don't recommend SMS 2FA, especially with SIM swapping methods becoming a lot more common. But YubiKeys, such as this really tiny one right here, and hopefully this goes up to the camera. That's like a YubiKey 5C Nano, I think. These are really good. You can still get around them, but they make you a lot more phish resistant. Or Authenticator, which is the Microsoft Authenticator on your app with number matching. That way, it gives you the number. You have to match it on your phone, and that's also the most phishing resistant method out there right now, outside of like a hardware token. If you're old school, you might have used an RSA key way back when with the numbers automatically shifting. That's also an option. So something hardware phish resistant. Yeah. The next half of that cloud equation is Entra ID. Like I was mentioning, it's more than likely um, companies are either hybrid or completely in Azure AD or Entra ID, and it's a gold mine for persistence. There's a lot of things you can do. I just have a couple examples here, right? But if you're using service principals for your different apps and stuff, a threat actor can easily spin up a legitimate looking service principal that lets them get back in. They can make you new user accounts the same way you would do an on-premise Active Directory. You would just do it in the cloud. You can actually set up a malicious, like a threat actor owned tenant. They can do a B2C link so that it's not federation. Federation is separate, but you can do federation as well, actually. You can either make a federated tenant that's threat actor owned, or you can do a B2C connection. That way the threat actor can still get back into your tenant because there's that link there. And like I was mentioning previously with the ESX, you can just spin up new VMs in Azure. So these are sort of some of the footholds that they'll take, and while moving around in your environment. Um, Real fast, a lot of the engagements that are specific to ransomware are over encryption wise in less than 72 hours, right? Some groups will spend a little more time moving laterally around. Typically, I'd say a good chunk of them don't care about making noise. We're doing a ransomware case right now. They got shut out within 2 hours, but they literally just downloaded Mimikatz trunk and the IP scanner, and off they went. For those of you who don't know, Mimikatz trunk is literally when you download it directly from GitHub, which is great. So they don't really care about setting off alarms. But the first 24 hours is sort of getting access, and I have it here as like 24 to 48 to separate, but 0 hours to 48 hours is typically getting access, getting some sort of foothold, and moving on laterally. So that can be running network scans, with like advanced IP scanner or whatever, to see what's in the environment. That can be hooking into the domain. There's a couple different ways, right? You can do Mimikatz, you can run Bloodhound or stuff like that to gain more information, get access. We've seen threat actors stop one of the domain controllers because they'll have multiple domain controllers in an environment. Stop a domain controller that's a virtual machine, mount the hard drive, and grab the ntds.dit straight off the disk from that. So a little more convoluted, but you get your NTDS.dit all the same. Um, you know, you'll discover sort of network shares and data stores within the environment. That's kind of like the first 48 hours. After that, you'll see exfil. Exfil can happen a number of ways. Typically, what you would see before a lot of companies started using S3 buckets and such is they would either a figure out where all the data is, move it to the system that they have a foothold on, archive it and send it out to like Mega or rclone or something like that. They might also just directly send it from those data stores out. Typically that'll probably set off more alarms, assuming they have any at the edge. Nowadays, we'll actually see threat actors just do S3 to S3 bucket transfers within AWS. So they'll have an S3 bucket within the same zone, so the fees are cheaper, and then they'll just do a S3 sync and they'll just get the data out that way. So that's a little easier. And as soon as they have what they want, they'll blow up the crypto locker. Examples like Mazed, Conti, a little bit older. Currents like Akira, Blockbuster, a couple others. They all kind of blend together, honestly. So I'm like struggling to pick up names, but pretty much run indiscriminately. After that, typically they'll read the ransom note on disk, but a lot of times they'll also reach out to like higher ups via email. So we've seen them email entire C level board saying, "Hey, we have your data. Negotiate with us here." And that's when a lot of clients will start execution.
6 o'clock in the morning.
His mic's hot there. I don't know.
We got it
Thanks.
fixed.
So that's kind of the time frame of everything. As I just want to double check. Okay, perfect. As we've gotten bigger in the ransomware sort of scene, it typically used to be just the operator doing the ransomware, so everything from initial access all the way to negotiation. Now we're seeing a lot of ransomware as a service. One of my old coworkers and Sense instructor, Ryan Chapman, he's talked about this before. I think he calls it humor or human operated ransomware. But essentially, what they're doing is you've got your main groups like Lockbit, like Akira, Blockbuster, Alpha V. They make the crypto locker and they will say, hey, for a fee, both to access the crypto locker, you can have the crypto locker, and for part of the bounty, you can use it. So they'll take, these affiliates will take 30-40% off the top just from the ransom, and all they're doing is supplying the crypto locker and nothing else. Different ransomware operators may use different crypto lockers. So you might have one group that only uses Lockbit. You might have another group that uses Lockbit, and they'll use Blockbuster, and they'll use a couple others. So these affiliates will do anything from just hosting the crypto locker, and providing access all the way to making full-on guides for how to use not just the crypto locker but different types of tooling. If you look at the Conti leaks, all of that was leaked when that group exploded at the start of the Russia-Ukraine war. I don't have that link handy, but they had guides published on, hey, this is how you use Mimikatz, this is how you use Metasploit, this is how you use Kali, this is how golden tickets and ntds.dit work. Like, they have guides for everything. So some of the affiliates do go to that extent, some don't. It really just depends affiliate to affiliate. So lately we've seen this shift to where like when you see Lockbit in your environment, it's not Lockbit themselves doing the work, it's an affiliate of Lockbit, someone who pays and gives Lockbit a cut just to use a crypto locker. So yeah, I see Jesse posted that. I think that might be it. It's probably one of the repos, but yeah, that Conti Pentester Guide GitHub is what's a part of, at least part of the leaks that happened with that group blowing up. I talked about this already briefly, so I am gonna skip this slide. Perfect. I'm noticing I'm missing a couple slides, so that's great. But typically, and this is sort of assuming before the crypto, before they've done exfil, or sorry, during exfil, right? I've mentioned it previously, but they'll use known tooling. I've got Empire, I've got Bloodhound here. They'll do things like abuse DCC just to get access to different credentials. If your environment's set up right, you might have DOP alarms like Veronis going off, saying something's happening. If you have a competent AV EDR product, that'll also be ringing alarm bells. more often than not, we'll see is that either they don't have AVEDR, or they're not monitoring the tenant, so they're like Falcon, they're ignoring the Falcon console, they're ignoring the S1 console, whatever. We've also had a couple cases where they mark the nefarious activity as a false positive because the SOC analyst doesn't know what they're looking at, and they just let the threat actor continue. They like say, "Yeah, unblock, it's fine, activity's fine." Um, so that's great. And I mentioned it previously, but threat actors will stand up their own infrastructure, be it on ESX or Azure or what have you. The biggest reason for doing this is they won't have any tooling on there, so there won't be any AVEDR, any DLP. It's pretty much sight unseen. It's a ghost of the system unless you have very thorough logging regarding your infrastructure and network. You're not going to see it. Um, some tools like Falcon will actually tell you if you have a host in the network that doesn't have Falcon. It'll actually scan the net BIOS names with systems on its subnet and will correlate that with the list of Falcon, and you might see something via that. Um, I don't know if any other EDR tools have that honestly offhand, but we have that, which is pretty nice. So if you're keeping an eye on that, you can kind of see, hey, this system's been up and it doesn't have Falcon. What's going on here? Stuff like that. So that's kind of like before the crypto lockers ran. There's alarms going off, but a lot of the time they're not seen. As a client moves throughout the network, they're going to do a couple things to try and spread the crypto locker as far as they can before they can actually execute it. PS exec is really, 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 really common. Somewhat less common actually is using GPO or Intune to actually put the crypto locker as a not a patch, but like one of the predetermined programs that needs to be on all systems. So they'll actually get into your AD, they'll put it in the GPO, so it'll distribute that via GPO, or they'll use Intune to start the deployment. PDQ is a free tool that we've seen threat actors use to also deploy it. So they'll spin up PDQ, PDQ hooks into Active Directory, and from there it's able to deploy it. So that's one of the ways you'll see them actually throw the crypto locker out, and other ways just via abuse of SMB. So lots of fun things there. And typically, if you're watching your traffic at the edge firewall, you'll see tons of data going out. I mentioned that staging before, where they're compressing all the data. It makes it smaller at the edge, makes it easier to move out of the network. It doesn't always happen, but it typically does happen. Sometimes it happens on the file server itself. Sometimes it happens on a local system. It just depends on the ransomware affiliate that's doing the work. Uh, so this is the fun part. A lot of the times, when a crypto locker runs, we've seen crypto lockers brick systems to where they can't boot up because it'll encrypt system files. Some crypto lockers will only encrypt user folders. So we've seen a kind of a varying array of things there. Sometimes your system will boot up perfectly fine, with the exception of like the ransomware notices. Sometimes it'll boot up, but the system profile itself is encrypted, the anti-user.dat, and so you can't log into Windows. It just says, it just errors you out, and so you're stuck at the login screen. Um, there is a way to bypass that. You have to go into recovery mode and do a net user for local user, if I'm not mistaken. But try and do that on like thousands of systems. It gets really tedious. It's better to blow them away. And then sometimes the system just doesn't boot at all. So, clients panicking because their system's going down. Um, they're hopefully trying to pull plugs on the network to stop more lateral movement or more encryption. Um, so there's a lot of chaos going on. A lot of victims don't necessarily know what's going on, and after that happens, then they'll see the ransom note or they'll get emails. We've seen more than emails happen too, in terms of forms of contact. So now the client is, or the victim is, in a rush to get the environment back up without losing data or money or income. Organizations like hospitals and energy providers, they need to be back up because it's legitimately life or death. So those cases are sobering to say the least, because you're also kind of like one of the parts of them getting back up and operational. So there's a race against time. Typically, if it's not as serious, it's just against the data controllers and regulators and stuff like that. You have to get your SEC 8K filing out now. Like, for those of you who don't know, I think it was early last year where if your the SEC finally passed a law stating that if your company has suffered monetary loss, you have to file a public 8K. So if you go back to, I'll just use August as an example with the two casinos, MGM and Caesars being breached, you'll see that they filed Section 8Ks, and you'll also see within some of their wording, they kind of said what they did with the threat actors negotiations. I'll let you guys look up the 8Ks yourself, but it's really interesting to see that language that they'll use. Um, from the IR side, there's the main thing, and always the main thing is like the lack of logs. Even excluding system locks being blown away. A lot of the time there's no network logging, there's no SIM, there's no AV, you're pretty much in the dark. The most you can do is triage tools to try and get info. And also your sort of fronted collectors. I'm sorry, I take that back. These images for like patrons array systems, try and carve stuff out of disk. So that's the main thing. The second thing is Active Directory, surprisingly, is a big stopper. Um, Deploying the triage tool is one of the key things to getting data in. You can't get your triage tool out, you can't get data, and you can't give the client an answer. They can't do their things. It's a cycle, and the client might also lose access. If they lose access to AD, and they can't log into their environment, then everything's hosed. We've seen threat actors occasionally actually lock clients out of their Entra ID, and it takes 2 to 3 days to get Microsoft to unlock that. So for 2 to 3 days, you can't do anything but watch and talk with the client because they can't log into anything. So that's always painful as well. So negotiating is something we don't advise on or do. There are third-party companies like Covert that'll do negotiations with behalf of the victims should they choose to do it. But that's a third-party negotiator there. There's if you go to 4528.com/ransom chat, if I'm not mistaken. That is one of the websites set up by Ryan Chapman for his Forensics 528 course, and that actually has screenshots from some of the ransom negotiations. I'm actually going to look it up right now. And it actually just redirects to a GitHub. Yeah, here we go. All right, cool. That's not what I wanted. I'm still thinking I'm on Mac OS. So these are actually ransomware chats. I don't know where these came from specifically. I don't know if these are from a third-party negotiator or they go themselves, but let's see. There's a couple records. Well, I say a couple. There's a ton of records with different groups. You've got Akira. There's Babook. There's Black Basta, Conti, Lockbit 3.0, Regal. There's tons of these. You can kind of just go through and see some of the things, right? Like Blue's victim, and it's just the victim talking with the specific affiliate. In this case, this is 120,000 for the ransom that they're asking for, and I am guessing that they used a third-party negotiator based on this language, and so they tried to negotiate down from 120 to 8,000, and yeah, I'm not gonna spend too much time on this, but there's definitely examples of these ransomware chats out there. So I'll go back here. A couple different negotiation tactics that you can use to do, but like I said, we don't advise on it. Negotiation is something that happens. I think the main reason that a lot of victims will negotiate is actually to delay the release of files onto the dark web, so they have time to figure out what's going on in their environment. Not so much to actually pay them and get the data deleted. So most of the time they'll use negotiation to delay it. Some clients will just pay the ransom to make the problem go away. Some cyber insurance will reimburse that, some doesn't. It just depends. So one factor is cyber insurance, and some of it will cover a ransom payment to the threat actor. So yeah, there's your the more you know factor of the day. Lastly, I did talk about sort of a couple of groups. Lizard Spider is sort of one of the bigger ones. Like I was mentioning earlier, they used to be Conti associated with the FSB. And I've mentioned the Conti leaks before, but what's interesting about Wizard Spider is they ran like a company. They had an HR department. They had a coding department. They had a recruiting department. They had an executive board. They had a payroll department. They operated very much like a normal company that you see around. I don't know that there's like an explicit a tree of employees or like a org chart out there with leaks, but they operated completely like a normal company. And they did do, if I'm not mistaken, they did do some of the ransomware affiliate stuff. So they had like an affiliates association department, right? So they operated completely like a company. They had user guides and everything. So this group's really persistent. Right now, they're in the form of Blockbuster, but I mean, going back, they used to be TrickBot and Ryu, which were pretty big during 2017, 2018, and then 2018, 2019 was like Ryuk into Conti, and then I think Blockbuster came about in 2022. I think, if I'm not mixing up my years. So, but some of these core people have remained the same. A large number of the Conti people left at the start of the Russia-Ukraine war when they had that like internal fight about who they supported. That led to the leaks, and so Black Basta is, from my understanding, and please don't quote me on this because I'm not an intel, but they're the group that sided with Russia. And then the second one I have to talk about is Bitwise Spider, which is currently locked at 3.0. They're a very, if not the biggest ransomware as a service group out there. I don't need to really explain their background. They're pretty prolific, but they've got tons of things. They don't operate as much as a company like Wizard Spider did, but they've got multiple tiers of support. You've got a bug bounty program, so on and so forth. They're affiliated with multiple different groups out there. I forget the guy's name, but they, like I was mentioning, the NCA got into Lockwood Infrastructure and leaked all their info. The NCA themselves actually did a talk at SleuthCon this year in DC. I don't know if those talks have been published yet. I think they are. Let me see if I can pull them up and grab that link really fast. But that was a really good talk. It was like a 30-minute talk, so I'm not going to be able to surmise it in any way, but they essentially talked about how they got into the environment and were able to play around. So they did a talk at DEF CON. There was a talk by I forget his name, but he also did a sort of a similar thing with interacting with the actual ransomware operator. And there was also another one at SleuthCon by I'm mixing up names. Okay, so there was Azim, who he actually, I think his was on Babook, so I'll put these in the Discord. That one was really good. They interacted with it, and I'm trying to find the NCA's talk, and I don't know if that one was recorded. Nope, I don't actually see theirs. Interesting. I thought it was recorded. Okay, well, anyways, the NCA did do a talk, I promise. I just don't see the recording right now on their website. But yeah, that's when they doxed this guy. And I don't remember his name. I just remember that the photo that they put up of him was in the same pose as our threat actor, a figurine, which may or may not have been on purpose. I really don't know. But yeah, that pretty much concludes it. I kind of like have a Q&A thing. I don't know if you guys do that here, but I'm open to pretty much most questions.
No, really interesting stuff. Definitely, we hope it open up, Mike. I like the Q&As towards the end, just so we can kind of get some more. I didn't know the flash to bang from day of infection to ransomware execution within 72 hours is the normal. It's insane.
Yeah, real fast. That's the guy, and that's our figurine. It's like, I promise that wasn't on purpose. But it was a Dmitry Korshev. That's the guy who runs Lockbit 3.0. I wish I had the talk they gave at SleuthCon was really good. I don't know why it's not on their YouTube right now. But yeah, I don't want to get that out of the way because I know my mind's going to be on it and I have to like show it. I'll go back to Q&A.
Nice, great presentation, Kay. This was awesome. I really related to a lot of the tools and tactics that you brought up from back in my DFIR days. I have a question for you. So, with all this AI stuff, I'm just in my brain, since I don't do DFIR anymore, I'm like, how is that going to be different? And what do I need to access to like check out what, people are doing in there to just like rule that out as some kind of way to get exploited? What are your thoughts on that for DFIR and AI?
We've seen a couple threat actors attempt to use ChatGPT. It hasn't worked out terribly well in most cases. I just gave like a 2-day talk at class at DevCon about utilizing AI in your environment. I don't really see it being helpful unless you have a very specially trained LLM with very good data. We don't leverage it at work in any sense. Well, I take that back. We do have a product based around an LLM, and we do have it internally, but on the IR side, as practitioners, we don't touch it. Yeah, sure, you can ask it, hey, decrypt this log for me, or not decrypt, but decipher this log for me, or give me more information on this, and it might be accurate, but I think even if we did do that, I think all of us would be verifying it with other things. So like as far as like utilizing an LLM or service like GPT or Claude, it's not entirely relevant for us yet. So
Okay. Cool. Right on, man. Thank you.
I can also give food recommendations in SoCal. Literally any question.
Okay, I have one more. I gotta say it. So, are you going to be at WRCCDC tonight? There's an ops meeting.
Maybe.
I'm just messing with you, man. It's all good.
You gonna be at DC 858 next week? Yeah, next Wednesday.
Next Tuesday I'm in LA.
Oh, lame. It's Corey, by the way. What's going on? I jumped on a little bit halfway through your meet because I was like, oh, Kay's presenting. Awesome talk though.
Thanks.
All right, best place to eat in Cali. Go.
Specify to cuisine, please.
Mexican.
Ooh. Here. Find this. There is a very good taco. There's 2 taco places. There's one in Laguna Niguel next to a church. I don't remember the name. They're very good, but the other one is Tacos Los Cholos, which is a really good taco place. They do it over charcoal. And then there's also a stand that has multiple locations. Angel's Tijuana Tacos are also really good. Actually, it's funny you bring that up because I actually got these made. These shirt stickers made for DEF CON. Let's see if I can get this up. Got that CompTIA one right there. And I've got Cisco one. So if you saw these at DEF CON, that was me.
Nice. Well, hey.
Those are my favorite.
I think we're going to go ahead, if nobody else has any questions, and cut off our stream here. So 5, 4, 3. Okay, cool. Nobody.